Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Usama, and I'm very happy to be talking to Vidya Krishnan in the following conversation. She currently holds the title of the Chief Learning Officer at one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. And I can definitely say that not only she's a competent leader, but she's a very positive human being as well. So with that, we formally welcome you to the show, Vidya. First of all, tell us about how had your day been so far?
Thank you, Sama. I'm really happy to be here. I have listened to some of the episodes, so I'm very honored to be one of your guests, and I really enjoyed the podcast. I'm having
Thank
a
you.
great day. I spent part of it at the Ericsson office, and we had a great summit of all of our employee resource groups. So I got to spend the morning talking to all of them and reminiscing about this incredible journey that they have been on, bringing engines of belonging, diversity, inclusion to Ericsson. So that's a pretty good start to the day, and this afternoon we've been getting ready for our mandatory training, our next film that will debut next week. So now I feel like I also have an idea what a Hollywood producer goes through before the movie launches. So totally
It's
different
pretty
ways of
cool.
spending the day. Yeah, but good day.
Yeah, nice. That's good to hear. So, first of all, before we go into the nitty gritties of the conversation, first of all, Vidya, tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, did you grow up in States or did you move here, and how had that journey been? Like, once you started with your bachelor's in Princeton. So, walk us through that journey first of all.
Sure, it's a crazy journey I'm very grateful for. And I wasn't always grateful for it when it was happening. So, really, the wisdom that comes with time and perspective to look back on the chaos of your life and appreciate all the twists and turns. So, I was proud to be a child of two cultures. I was born in Bangalore, India. Very, very proud to be from Bangalore. Our family is Tamilian, South Indian. And I came to this country as an immigrant when I was 3 months old. So, actually, in fact, my parents were already living here. And my mother went back to India when she was about, I think, 4 months pregnant with me to visit her mother. And life was so difficult actually back then. My dad was an assistant professor. They were not well off at all. They lived in a very cold place in the dead of winter. I think when she saw her mother and family, she became overwhelmed with homesickness and she said, I'm going to have the baby here. So I was born in India and I came to this country when I was 3 months old. I grew up in the States, first in New York until I was about 4 years old. Then we moved to New Jersey. So I'm very proud to be a Jersey girl. And every summer almost, I would spend back in Bangalore, a little bit in Mumbai and Pune with my family there. My grandparents, especially, were very active in raising me. So I was very much a product of two different worlds, two different cultures, which is no big deal anymore. But back then, it felt so different and unique and in ways I didn't always appreciate. When I was here in America, I was the Indian kid. When I was in India, I was very much the American kid.
We're
It was
too
hard.
brown for white people and too white for brown people.
I was just always, something different, which I now look back on and realize how lucky was I to feel at home and well loved in two completely different places that stopped being so different as time went on. So again, as a kid, sometimes, especially when you get bullied on the bus or you feel like you have difficulties fitting in, those things aren't always apparent to you. But really, looking back, I realize it just shaped so much of who I am, who I've become, who I try to be. So I actually feel quite grateful for that. I did my undergraduate studies in New Jersey at Princeton in electrical engineering. Then I did my master's degree in electrical engineering in California. So from one coast to the other, that was my first time I had ever been in California.
Right.
So beautiful at Stanford. And then I worked for AT&T. I was very now I call them my customer, but before I used to call before Ericsson and Nortel before that
Yeah.
they were my employer. They actually sent me to graduate school, so I'm always going to be eternally grateful to this company for my education. I worked for them for a number of years, and my husband Karthik, he works for Texas Instruments. We met
Mhm.
in school. He joined that company right after he graduated. That's how we wound up here in Texas.
No, that's pretty cool. And the best thing about being an immigrant is that you bring that tenacity, that resilience and strength from being an immigrant, and then you bring those traits of not giving up into the system, which is free of any prejudices. And gives an equal opportunity to whoever is a keen player in this level playing field. So I think that's the best thing about being an immigrant, and I'm an immigrant myself, and that's how I look at things. Like, you come here to a brand new country, you can become basically whoever you are. You can get rid of whatever negative things that were associated with your personality, and then you can take a fresh start. So I think that is the best thing about being an immigrant in North America. So I can totally resonate to your journey as well. It's pretty exciting. So now if we move forward in the timeline, and now that things have progressed a bit, so now tell me, how did you, like, you used to be a technical contributor before, so how did you end up being in a learning position, like someone who advocates for learning in the telecom industry?
I think deep down I've always been that though. So I have to say my journey was more about revealing myself rather than constantly changing myself. But it would probably look like I was making a lot of pivots. I often tell people, I think my kids are sick of hearing this phrase, but it's still true. I'm in my fourth career, and I hope I have just as many ahead of me. My first career, I didn't talk about it when I was telling you my story, but it's important to know my first career was actually being a camp counselor.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at a nonprofit called the YMCA for most of my high school years. And this was really my first formative job, which was to teach kids and to, take care of them and come up with creative activities. And again, for a nonprofit, which meant we had to do everything ourselves. And looking back, again, I can say this was a gift. It didn't pay at all, didn't pay, but it rewarded me in so many other ways because very early in my life, I realized I loved this. I loved working with kids. I loved learning. I loved teaching. I loved the creative freedom of coming up with new and experimental ways of engaging people and having fun. So even though that's just a summer job, it was so much more to me. And I think that that happy memory never left me. It always was this indelible thumbprint that I actually love learning. Never forgot that, and I had very early exposure to it. So I always say that really was my first career. Didn't pay well, but it was my first career because it gave me so much perspective about what my passions were. Then my second career was engineering, electrical engineering. Here, I can tell you I loved engineering and I was not good at it. Both things were true. I struggled. I had much easier time learning other subjects, math, science. I loved these subjects and I was very, very challenged by them. I often found I had to work 3 times as hard to get one third the grade. There were many dark moments along that journey where the only reason I stayed with it was because I enjoyed that knowledge. I thought it was powerful. I still do. I thought it was transformative. And I was super lucky to have a family that told me as long as you have this will to learn this, it's more important than how much skill you have at this moment because the skill will come with time and tenacity. But the will, you have that will, and that's all that matters. I think today a lot of kids don't have that message, don't hear that message, they don't realize that message. It's very easy to conflate being good at something with being meant to do it. And for me, it was the very opposite. What I felt I was meant to do, I honestly wasn't good at for a very long time. And so it was a journey, it was a struggle. But again, I loved technology, the power of it, the simplicity, the elegance of mathematics, especially at this time that there were these things called networks. And, they connected people and signals and the magic of Fourier transformations, turning signals into things that could be, sent. So I really enjoyed that work, even though I struggled to do it. And I became an engineer. And I think that difficulty that I encountered along the way actually made me a better engineer because it took me longer, quite frankly, to understand things. I cared a lot more about how they were explained and how they could be taught to other people. So even in that profession, which I did for almost 18 years, I tell my kids, Mom is so old that I've lived through every G, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, like many of us, we should be very proud to have lived through all the Gs. And when you care that much about how it's learned and how it's taught, partly because you struggled to learn it, I think it makes you that much more passionate about how it is taught. So from the earliest days, I would kind of have this side gig when I would volunteer with the training department and say, can I teach the class? Can I teach the internal class? Can I even teach a customer class? So from the earliest days, this was sort of like a side hobby that I had. And I was probably the one in the team always a little bit obsessed with what learning journey are we going to go on next? How are we going to teach this to the new people? Just because it was the only way to channel my own struggle. And as an engineer, again, I worked on, I started off working on GSM, then for a long time worked on CDMA, and then UMTS. I led network engineering, network dimensioning, modeling, doing everything from customer input questionnaires at the time to engineering the capacity and the configuration of wireless and wireline networks all over the Americas, working very much directly with our customers. And that was a privilege and a pleasure. And it was also truly a lesson in what matters because they appreciated when I took the time to explain, when I could be articulate about what I did know and what I didn't know. And so again, I found that despite the struggle that I had academically, that struggle actually made me better professionally. And I really wish somebody would have told me while I was struggling academically that this could be a good thing, but at the time I didn't know. So I did really discover that, that penchant for caring about how people learn translates to success and I think an advantage in any role, but especially a customer facing one, because customers care when you care and when you value their learning as part of their success. I think they feel it. So that was truly educational, and I did that for, again, almost 2 decades, and I led network engineering and then also network engineering and network integration. So really seeing the end-to-end, and I know this is what you do, right? You're in R&D and you're configuring these things, and maybe I'm the team that you would have handed that off to actually go and dimension it and put it into a customer's network and actually turn it up and set the parameters and run scripts in the maintenance window and all of those things. It was really difficult. It was sometimes very high stress and high stakes, but I very much also loved it. Throughout that journey, I was pivoting, in my mind, always back, wanting to go back to learning. So when I finally did it, everyone thought I was crazy, both the
Yeah.
company and my family, but it felt quite
Yeah.
natural for me to pivot to that. So from that engineering career, I pivoted to leading the North American training department. So we actually taught our customers, and that was a service that we sold. So it was like pivoting from being part of a large machine to suddenly being like a small business owner inside of Ericsson. Because the training business, our customer training business at Ericsson is amazing. I always say it's like the salt that you put on the food. It doesn't take up a lot of space, but it is the thing that makes everything, that much better and taste good and work. And so we were a tiny but mighty part of engineering our customers' networks. And this journey for me was so special because it was both entrepreneurial, because I was in charge of a profit and loss. I was in charge of a business, small, but still a complete business for which I was and the team responsible for the revenue, for the profit margin. How much should this cost? How do we work to position the business development and all of these things? At the same time, this was the exact moment that learning was undergoing a digital revolution. And the idea
Mhm.
that people could learn without necessarily getting on a plane and they could learn in tactile and social ways digitally was just taking hold. So this was also a very interesting time and an explosive time for creativity and cutting edge technology. At the same time, how do you master these timeless principles of how you hold someone's attention, how you, again, overcome some of their emotional barriers so that they can intellectually progress, all of those things. So I just loved that. That was the third career. And finally, the fourth
Right.
one was to pivot from that into the people function, into HR, and be part of learning and development. So I always tell people I started out engineering networks, and now I'm engineering employee experiences.
So now that we have wrapped up these four careers, I want to talk about one of the challenges that I felt when I first started in the telecommunications company. It's unlike coding. It's unlike using a compiler where you can go into debug mode, you can see things. But then as we talked about Fourier transforms, DFTs, DTFS and whatnot. So with all of these technologies, they are using waveforms, they're using sinusoids and frequencies in the air that we can't see. There are no compilers that we can install on our laptop and see, okay, this is how the LTE network is working. It takes a bit of time and it's difficult to understand. Of course, once you master it, it's a very useful skill, but it takes a great amount of time to master that knowledge. So I want to talk about, like, when you guys or when your team sits together, how do they think about visualization of this aspect? Like, what are some of the ideas that we can make this learning a bit more easy for people who are starting in telecom and who don't have a prior background in there?
You make a great point, which is actually at that moment, it's not just the technical knowledge that you need that helps you. It's the knowledge of how to be forensic with a team to uncover the root cause of what you're seeing that you didn't expect to see. And this is, I would really say, it's part science and it's part social art, because it's how you mobilize more than one person, because it's a network. You are not the one who knows the entire end to end to the level that you would need to debug what's happening. You need to pull in other people, and you need to be able to keep everyone on the same page about the problem statement. You need to create the psychological safety for people to question and say, what about this and what about that? And try this, try that. I think you need to be both forensic and infinitely patient to go down the rat holes and eliminate, like what a compiler would do if it could compile this. Probably today's generative AI could compile this no problem, but to eliminate possibilities and then still keep the team positive. Well, that didn't work. Okay, what else could it be? What else could it be? So I do think that's something that I found both really interesting and fascinating at the same time that it was challenging, which was it wasn't just technical knowledge. It was now how effectively do I combine my technical knowledge with everybody else's to reverse engineer a situation that we're all seeing and get to the heart of it in a forensic way. And I keep using the word forensic to say a way that is devoid of blame and shame. Because the
Mm-hmm.
minute you let that stuff creep in, you are no longer problem solving in the way that an engineering problem deserves, right? Then it's about, oh, let it not be my fault, let it not be my fault. So I think I used to, as much as that was usually stressful because nobody wants things to be broken, everybody wants everything to work, that detective work was always a combination of technical acumen, being really diligent about what you find and what you don't find so that you don't repeat mistakes, and you develop an almost an instinct for it doesn't look like this, it looks like that. And this orchestration is the closest word I can think. You bring together all these different people who play these different instruments in terms of the things that they specialize in knowing collectively as one sort of big brain tackling the problem.
Right. And I think people who know about this might be able to relate better, but for someone who might not have an idea about this access network of telecom that operators are actively maintaining, it's like sitting in a cockpit with like 10,000 control knobs. Everything does something, but nobody knows about all of those 10,000 knobs. It's just about that over time you build that experience after tinkering around with few of them, seeing what happens, then expanding and then expanding. I think it's a really nice aspect of looking at this problem. Now I want
And
to
if I
relate it
carry
to,
your analogy
yes,
further,
yeah.
Osama, do I want to be in the cockpit with someone screaming every time a light
No.
turns red? Or do I want to be with someone who calmly responds, even if they don't know, and
Yeah.
does enough discussion, cohesion, and teaching to your point, right? At that moment, you have to have someone who knows about that thing, teaching the people who don't know about that thing just enough to tap into everyone's brain. And so I constantly kept getting, it was like this sort of divine message, like this learning thread, this teaching thread, it shows up in everything. When leaders can be teachers, they become better orchestrators at, figuring out how to solve the situation in the cockpit in a way that people still feel comfortable flying the plane. And this really does make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I would even go a step further in describing it that whenever we are explaining something to someone for the first time, and if it's a complicated thing, we should not tell them that it's complicated. First of all, we should just present the idea. And my philosophy is that if it took me a certain amount of time to learn something, it's not a necessary thing that it's going to take the same amount of time for someone else to learn if they have a better teacher. which in that case can be me if I took my time to understand something. So then if I am to teach something to someone, then I would rather not say that, hey, it's super complicated, because then it just subconsciously creates some red
Intimidates.
flags in your
It
head that
intimidates.
right.
I was intimidated,
Yeah.
and I think that again, I now look back and and I think it was Robin Roberts, the anchor from Good Morning America, one of my heroes. She always says, "Make your mess your message," and that was like this mess of mine that took me so long to understand something. That would constantly be my message. Oh, it took me a long time to understand this, so let me really simplify it for you. And I would use some almost insultingly simple analogy because that's how, and it usually involved food actually. But anyway, that's how I would like understand it in my own mind. And you're right, you explain it to someone that way, and the barrier is immediately lowered. Like, okay, if you can say it this way, then I can understand it too. And I think that time and again, I just see this being true. If you can lower the emotional barriers to learning for people, then all the intellectual stuff can get in. But if you fail to do that, it doesn't matter how much intellectual stuff you're containing. It doesn't matter the volume that you contain. It will never get across. This becomes so simple. And if I can tell a quick little story, Fourier transforms. My God, I must have learned this thing like literally 5 different times before I had a shred of comprehension. Like, what is this thing? What does it do? All these mathematical descriptions of how it works. I knew it was powerful. I knew it was like so important, but my brain did not grasp it. And then I had a manager who told me one day, "Oh, Fourier transforms? That's like frozen food. You take the food, it's all messy, you freeze it into a block of ice, you can chunk up the blocks, you can put them in boxes, you can put the boxes in a truck, you can move them across the country, you can get them back on the other side and defrost them and get back the food. That's what a Fourier transform does." And
That is
suddenly,
beautiful.
bam, bam.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, not Princeton, not Stanford, never got that Fourier transform to be understood the way his frozen food analogy did. And I think that was the beginning of my obsession with food analogies. But you see the point. When you can actually figure out something that simple, you make it accessible for everyone and you bring everyone up to the level of problem solving that the situation demands. So you are so right. That ability to teach is everything.
Right. And now I want to talk about the business side of things for a little bit. So, what I've observed so far is that, first of all, cloud is an emerging field and nobody can deny that. It has a lot of potential. So, if we look at Google, we look at AWS, and we look at other cloud providers, all of them have this ecosystem of certifications. The way I see it, it has two aspects. First one is that it's generating X amount of dollars for every company because they're providing these certificates for at least the cheapest, I think, is about 150 USD or something. So then the second aspect is that for students who, let's say, do not have access to a very big computational machine, or who do not even have a need for that, this is a way for them to show their employer that they were interested in something. So they went out to formally learn something. Why do we not have such a thing in telecom industry? Because 3GPP standardized, LTE is pretty standardized, 5G is standardized, interfaces are standardized. Why don't we have such an ecosystem in telecom that for new grads who are entering this domain, not only they can prove their dedication with this, it also helps internally for employees that they can tell their managers, hey, I went through a certain structured career path or certain structured learning path, and this is where I am, and now I know the stuff to that extent. So what are your thoughts about that?
This is a question you even asked me in the preparation. I have been thinking about it ever since you mentioned it, and I thought deeply about it. And this is my view. There are 3 big reasons we don't have this today, but we do have it in the world of IT, as you said. Like everybody knows what a how you get a, for example, Cisco certification, or how you get an AWS certification, and you do see that most of these certifications are in some aspect of computing. And I think it is very much because those protocols were very much designed with full open transparency and interoperability from day one. The world of telecom, especially when it comes to wireless, while the standards are standardized, so much of those things are proprietary, and only certain places is it interoperable. So I think that in a way, even though it's the very reason companies are competing for the, with their products and portfolio, including us, it's the reason that you have more curricula than certification, because every company can teach its version of 5G, and it can teach the fundamentals of 5G that are totally universal because they are, part of the universal standard. But the Ericsson radio access network has proprietary aspects. The Nokia one has proprietary aspects. So in order to have a certification out there, well, who would certify? And here we have, and I really understood that there's only certain areas where you could safely do that without actually getting into a realm where you risk compromising IPR. So I do think that's one of the reasons we don't quite see it in telecom the same way we see it in aspects of computing. There's so much IPR involved. The other is, I think, simply the end-to-end complexity of a network. It involves, you just said it, right? I mean, it involves radio frequencies. It involves multiplexing. It involves packet core, technologies. It involves cloud and cloud native and containerized computing. Then it involves artificial intelligence. And so it's almost as though there's just so much. How could there just be one single certification that could cover it all? And so we encourage our people, okay, go get this and go get that and go get this and go get that. I do think for some of the more mature technologies, there are certifications that can and should happen. And we're starting to do this, and I'll give you an example, especially in Connect to Learn, which is Ericsson's flagship societal education initiative that's aimed at, among other things, dismantling the digital divide. Here we are partnering with universities to create 5G curricula and certifications, that are accessible to everyone, that again don't compromise IPR but do teach the fundamentals of these networks and the technologies behind them. So I do think you're right. If it were more standardized to the point where you could obtain 8 certifications and then more than prove that you qualify, it would be very much easier for someone just starting out in the field to acquire and develop that sense of mastery. However, I think the complexity of the network itself and the myriad technologies involved are the very reason that it's not so simple.
Right. But to the extent where we can go, I think we should. And by this
I
question, I
agree.
do aim to plant a seed.
I
I
see
don't know
that.
if it's going to
Consider
go
it
anywhere.
planted. It's planted. It's planted. Simplify.
That's
Make a
good.
few certifications for wireless technologies that everyone can just build. I think in many ways we're taking this systematic approach. When you think about the critical skills that we value at Ericsson, looking out in the future, we have tried to be that simple and systematic. We say what these technologies are. We say what we mean by them. We establish that across the company there are 4 levels of skill proficiency, and we define what are the equivalent ways to be level 1. Some of them may be a certification from the Ericsson Technical Certification Program. Some of them may be demonstrating performance. Some of them might be an assessment. So there are multiple ways you could say to test out or to prove or qualify as being the level. And you're right that we care much more about what level you are and what level you are going to be and how much you have shifted your level than precisely what way are you going about it. We care much more about where you have been, where you're going, the skill shift. And I think that is with this exact same principle in mind that you have. How can you make it more universally accessible for people to qualify and to upskill and reskill in ways that are not overly intimidating, expensive, mysterious? I think with that we are with you.
Yeah. Okay. So over the course of time that you've spent with operator, vendor, and in the industry in general, what are the common traits of successful teams that you've observed? Like if you since you've been in the business lead role, taking care of the business aspects and not just technical aspects. So like what are some of the common traits that you've seen in teams that are successful, fun to work with, and tell us a little bit about that.
I think the first one is a sense that you deeply care. I don't know any other way to say it, like the genuine care of a leader. Care for the team, for the care and feeding of the team, care for the customer, care for the quality of the product and the work that gets done, the work product. So care is the number one ingredient. It's really hard for a team to be sustainably successful. Everyone has their, great, glorious flash in the pan moment, but to be sustainably successful in the absence of care, I really don't know how you do that. I've never seen that. Without at least a terrible human cost that nobody should have to pay. So care is number one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second one is psychological safety, and that's something other than care. I can say and feel that I care about you, but I can say and behave in a way that intimidates you, where you don't feel comfortable telling me what you do know, what you don't know, what you're worried about, what you tried and it didn't work, what you want to try and it may not work. And in that environment, it's very hard to do what is right and to do what our customers deserve, which is for us to try everything and do the best we can, and to be open and upfront about what we know, what we don't know, what risks we have to mitigate. It's hard to see the full solution and the full possibilities. So I think the first is care, and the second one is very much psychological safety. And the third, I think, is knowing how to do the work. I think teams need environments, leaders, and team members who care about their collective knowledge and constantly are ready to get their hands dirty, so to speak, doing real work, getting real things done. Because this is what our stakeholders appreciate. This is what team members appreciate because we take pride in our work. This is what customers appreciate because they see people working for them. Uh, Many people talk about deliverables and they don't produce the deliverable. There's something to be said for the sometimes not glamorous getting things done, getting them across the finish line, managing the project and making sure it's done. So, and I know what I just said is a mix of conceptual, emotional, and like concrete, but I really do think it is that mix that people value most. And in all my experiences, really over multiple decades, that's how old I am, these are the three, not only are they the three things that I perceive as meaning the most, they're the three things that at my happiest moments, when I felt the most fulfilled or the most successful in terms of my customer success or my team success, all three of these things were happening.
Um, Now that we are reaching the end of our conversations, I just have a few more things to cover up before we wrap up the conversation with you. So, tell me about your long-term vision with the position that you're in right now. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind, and then what do you want to achieve in the tenure that you have right now?
Sure. When I look at the challenges that are in front of us, both looking around the macroeconomic trends, the micro trends, looking within at the realities of our people and our workforce, and then looking beyond at what the world and what our business needs, my vision and our vision is to build future critical skills systematically and put those skills to work systematically. So to be extremely systematic, which means it's repeated, it happens whether you're having a good year or a bad year, about knowing what skills matter most, what skills are the future skills that our people need, and they need to build them now and not just in time, how to go about building them, and the tricky part, but equally critical, how to put those skills to work. I think we see in the world people are hungry to build their skills. They recognize the world is changing and they are hungry to go about building them, but they're equally hungry for the opportunity to try them, put them to work, know that those new skills are being leveraged, find safe places where they can apply them and develop. So quite simply, my vision is, how do we build future critical skills and put them to work systematically with speed, with scale, and with the accountability that our wanted position demands. That's the vision. I think the legacy that I hope to be known for is service in learning and learning in service. It's just that simple for me. When you can get that right, when learning can become a service to yourself as a form of self-care, but to people that you care about as a form of getting ready for our future, that is value creation at its finest. So I hope that's the legacy that I'm known for and that my team is known for. People who are engines of service in learning and learning in service.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And I think one of the things, it's a tiny thing that I do in my line of work as well, is that whenever I tend to write scripts, I always leave comments in there because I'm like, whoever poor soul would read this, at least this might help them in understanding it.
Exactly.
Right.
People like
Okay.
me who really appreciate it when someone took the time to comment that code that otherwise I would have no idea what it was saying. So yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to ask you about is that with 5G, there are a lot of opportunities, and a lot of governments are trying to leverage the technology to provide more services for their people. What are some of the key things that are your most favorite topics? For example, when it comes to education sector, that you can name for us
Oh yes.
as your favorite application of the technology.
Oh, it's hard to pick just one. I mean, first of all, 5G is transformative, period, right? Transformative as an innovation platform, but particularly transformative to education. It's revolutionizing how education happens, and therefore, conversely, education needs to educate people on 5G. It allows, I think, for immersive learning like never before. And we talked about this already, right? What happens when I can lower your emotional barriers to learning? And what better way to do that than to enchant your senses and engage and invite you into spaces where you can experience and try things safe to fail, safe to try again, welcoming spaces. We talked about the village of teachers needed. Well, what happens if you're in a geographic place where that village is not around you in physical proximity? Can we create a virtual village for you to access of caring teachers, of champions, mentors that you might otherwise never come across in your geography or in your situation? So I think this ability to create more experiential learning and to make that learning accessible to people everywhere through virtual village and dismantling the digital divide, these are use cases that I'm particularly excited about because they will literally ignite learning and make sure that, again, world-class education reaches the world, which is absolutely what we need today. There's too much inequity in that. So I think that's one of my favorites. And I think the ability to both deploy 5G on an unprecedented global basis. There's still so much of the world that doesn't yet have it. We see the use cases abound. And then to show how this powerful combination of enterprise on top of our mobile networks to monetize 5G and to really bring both an innovation platform for developers, but also to serve our customers with enterprise grade capabilities for innovation that they could only dream of before, that completely transform how they do business, will create so much entrepreneurial opportunity. And I love that, that maybe the startups of the future will come from places and people that you would never have thought of as being innovators and entrepreneurs. But that will be made possible partly because 5G enables their education to happen in ways it could never happen before. And then that education in turn enables them to leverage 5G in ways that we could never dream of before. So this for me is a very exciting, virtuous cycle that we have to make happen. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Ericsson.
Yeah, and honestly, all the best wishes and prayers go out your way, and I hope you get to achieve the vision that you have for not only us but like the greater humanity in general. Now, in the closing remarks, Vidya, what advice would you have for first of all students and then for early career professionals as they are navigating through the chronicles of the career?
Number one, do not give up on yourself. Just do not give up on yourself, even when it feels like everyone else has. If I could go back and tell my younger self anything, it would have been, it's going to be okay. Don't give up on yourself. It's going to be okay. Um, as long as you are constantly willing to learn and recognize that that will usually needs to come before the skill. We have a saying that we are fond of, where there's a will, there's a skill in a way. So that's the first thing, to not give up on yourself and have that will. I think the second thing is, and this is again taken from what has been true in my own life, when you ask someone, what's the best moment you've ever had in your career? Everyone thinks of something, right? Close your eyes and think of that. When you double click on that moment, you realize that three forces were at work. And that may have been accidental, but there's no reason you can't engineer them to happen. And usually it was a combination of you were working at something that involved your skills and talents. Some that you had and strengths that you always had, and some that were absolutely new and you were building them. So, talent. It was something that was deeply meaningful to you, deeply aligned with a purpose, whether you realized it or not. So, purpose. And it was delivering on an opportunity that was really meaningful to the company or to society or to some stakeholders. It meant something, some economic opportunity that was critical for the organization. So, opportunity. So, there was an old company called Novations that used to talk about exactly this TOP, this intersection. It looks just like what you see in the literature about the Japanese concept of Ikigai, of Daniel Pink's work, on Drive. It's those intersection of those three things. I have found this to be true in my life as well. Richard Leiter, the coach, executive coach, says this is the difference between a career and a calling. A calling, in his beautiful words, is you get to do work you love in the place you love with people you love on purpose. And it is the confluence of those three things. It is not your comfort zone, but it's your growth zone. And so my advice to young people is, first of all, be careful how you define success, because it's only half the equation. It's success and fulfillment. And many people experience success devoid of fulfillment. But our wish for them and I think our calling is to help our people find their calling, and that is the intersection of fulfillment and success, which is TOP. Use that, which again, the talents, you have to look around, look at the world, look at yourself. What can I build? What do I think people tell me I'm good at, that I should become better at? What are the critical skills that I need to build? The purpose is, no one can tell you that. You have to look within what matters to you. And then you have to look beyond. What are the opportunities that people are going to pay money for if we can deliver on them? And you need to find that intersection, and that's what you continually point yourself in that direction, even if you have to pivot 100 times to get there. And it's not a destination that's waiting for you, but I do think it's something that you craft into whatever job you're doing. So even when I was in engineering, I was crafting learning into that job because I cared about it so much. And even in learning, I find ways to craft engineering into that job because I care about it so much. So I think also sometimes we have this restlessness. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And I get that. But I think sometimes we also overlook our own capacity to craft our jobs using skills so that right where we are, we can start growing ourselves into the next version of ourselves for the next opportunity. That is, for me, the very epitome of what Ericsson says it is to be the CEO of your own career, to design your future. Job crafting with skills. So that would be my advice to young people. You're going to be okay. Don't ever give up on yourself. And TOP, don't settle for a career. Always go for a calling.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vidya, for that closing remark. I really appreciated it. It honestly strengthens my belief in myself again as well. And thank you for being such a leader for us that we can have as a role model, and then that we can look up to. And with that, we'll definitely let you go. And as far as our audience are concerned, we really hope that you had a great time listening to this impactful conversation. And if you have any more questions about telecom in general or just about career development, feel free to engage with us in the comment section, and we'll love to answer your questions. Until the next episode rolls out, do check us out on other streaming platforms. This is your host, Usama, signing off, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you.